The iPhone X was an extremely innovative phone in its heyday. It combines so many modern-feeling aspects with hardware that, no matter which way we spin it, is fast approaching 6 years old. And now with iOS 17 officially announced, we know for a fact that the iPhone X, along with its siblings and the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus, will not be getting the next major iOS iteration, but will be forever stuck on iOS 16 moving forward. Hey, how's it going? I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and the iPhone X might just be my favorite iPhone ever made, and using it in 2023 doesn't feel out of place at all, at least on the surface. The feel of the phone is so premium. The glass, the stainless steel, the edge-to-edge OLED and notch display, these are things that are still huge aspects of the most expensive Pro iPhones being sold, albeit now in a more refined form. Even so, it's hard to look at this and believe that it's outdated to the point of losing software support. But it was indeed released in late 2017, and it's lived a pretty good life since then. In 2023, the main concern I found is certainly battery life among its users. It was never great to begin with, talking as an original owner of the iPhone X, and so 6 years later, without a recent replacement, it's probably feeling a bit rough. Aside from that though, this is still such a nice phone, and definitely one worth examining. So today we ask the question, how does the iPhone X hold up 6 years later? Firstly, if you have an iPhone X and have been thinking about upgrading, I do think this is a good time to do so. While losing iOS support and not getting iOS 17 doesn't mean your phone will suddenly become obsolete and useless, it's still not a fun position to be in, though Apple is pretty good with providing security updates for at least an extra couple of years. You'll also have a couple of years of still being able to download pretty much every app, but sooner or later the phone is going to fall further and further out of date. Plus, no new iOS means no new features, leaving what you have potentially feeling stale sooner than later. This all makes for the ideal time to upgrade right now, though it's important to note that as of making this video, the iPhone X is still currently running the latest version of iOS 16 and will continue to be on the latest until fall 2023 when iOS 17 will officially drop. If there's anyone considering buying the iPhone X, I would be hesitant, mainly because of the battery as well as the overall value versus newer options. On eBay.com, the X goes for as low as $100, although I saw a lot of listings above that, closer to $200 even. There's a bit of a gap, some disparity there, and make sure you don't get a bad condition device, as it may not only have a degraded battery, but potentially screen burn-in as well. You can check battery health by going to Settings, Battery Health, and that percentage there will tell you how much of the original capacity remains. As it gets to the low 80s and under, that's when performance will really feel worse, and your life may not last long even with not a ton of usage. Though with a healthy battery, I do think light to moderate use can still get a day out of this thing, at least from those I've talked to. While there are big downsides to the age of the phone, because it was the first ever $1,000 iPhone and was a huge jump forward for them, the iPhone X doesn't feel out of place in 2023, and in some cases feels even more modern than some of Apple's newer devices. The ones I'm thinking of specifically is the iPhone XR from 2018 and the iPhone 11 from 2019, as well as maybe the newer iPhone SEs that still retain the home button. But the XR and 11 at least are chunkier and have LCD screens rather than OLED, with significantly lower resolutions. But even so, those phones do have better battery life, and the newer hardware does mean iOS 17 support. If you are going to buy used, the iPhone XR goes for around and not much more than the iPhone X, and then the 11 not much more cash than the XR. So if you've got a budget of around $200, I would try to find something like an 11 if you can find a good one for that price, as there are pretty massive improvements in both battery and the camera systems, plus you're getting iOS 17 and probably 18 as well. The iPhone XR may not get iOS 18, that remains to be seen, but the 11 should. Enough of the value though, most of you probably aren't looking to buy one anymore. The iPhone X, again, feels like a modern device on the surface, and that's quite the accomplishment for any smartphone from 2017. Performance with the A11 chipset and 3 gigs of RAM is still pretty spiffy with little slowdown. 3 gigs of RAM sounds bad, but iOS is very well optimized. There is the occasional hiccup, but it seems to be fine for me with a decent battery here, and that's what I love to see, given iOS 16 is the last version this iPhone X will run. So in the very least, this phone will still feel fast on its final version of iOS, unlike the phones of 10 years ago. Heck, practically speaking, as I've pointed out in many of my iPhone reviews, this phone is just as capable as something like the iPhone 14 Pro. Sure, it's missing some of the newer features, but ultimately it can download the same apps and do almost anything you could possibly want to do. Games, social media, streaming, web browsing, you name it, and the iPhone X will be able to do it. Assuming, again, you've got a healthy battery and the phone isn't giving you trouble. It is 6 years old, and so with that age could come some other issues that might bog down the experience. There was 64 gigs and 256 gigs originally. If you're running a little low on storage, you might find that clearing some of that up helps, or restoring the phone to factory settings completely also might speed things up a bit. The display on the iPhone X is still absolutely breathtaking, as we've got that first ever Super Retina OLED with a crispy resolution of 1125 by 2436 on the kind of small 5.8 inches. This phone feels quite small to me. The perfect size for me is what started with the iPhone 12 at 6.1 inches. The smaller versions of these newer iPhones are a little bit bigger than the 10 is now. The OLED here means that colors pop so much more than on an LCD iPhone, and the blacks are truly black. I've used this clip before with my iPhone 13 versus my iPhone 11 just to show the difference in how the LCD on the 11 is still fully lit on a black screen, whereas the OLED solely shows the Apple logo. This was new for the iPhone X in 2017, so having it here has really helped the phone feel current to me. Of course, the notch has within it all the sensors for Face ID, which was new in 2017. The iPhone X might be technically slower to unlock than newer phones, but it still feels very fast and efficient, so I've got no complaints there. The design of the iPhone X from the back is gorgeous, and there's not a whole lot to say. It screams of class. With only silver or space gray to choose from, it really feels a lot like the iPhones of old, and I think that was intentional. Also, they probably ran out of time to make any more colors, and so the XS of course brought gold, and we've seen plenty more since then. The X looks like the older phones too, with the throwback to the iPhone 4 being really obvious here. Objectively, I do prefer the newer iPhone designs, although the camera bumps are just absurd at this point, but I think the iPhone X still looks so good. It was a huge upgrade over the aluminum era. Glass was the way to go, as it allowed for wireless charging, which is here, along with fast charging if you have the appropriate accessories. No magnetic wireless charging in MagSafe, as that came with the iPhone 12. Also, sadly, AirPower never came out, so unless you're me with what is probably the only working AirPower prototype in existence, you're out of luck. We mentioned the camera bumps, so let's look a little closer here. We've got two 12 megapixel sensors vertically oriented and both optically stabilized, one being a 1x zoom wide lens, and then the second being a 2x zoom telephoto. The selfie camera on the front is 7 megapixels and can produce some okay selfies, nothing great, but not bad, though video can only be recorded from there in 1080p at 30 frames per second, good enough for FaceTime. From the rear, we can record video in 4K 60, which is awesome, and this was the first or of the first iPhones to do so. This is 4K 30, but even today, I gotta say, this isn't bad at all. iPhones have always been great with video, and it really helps the longevity so many years later. As for normal photography, it can be a bit hit and miss. This is an older smartphone, so holding it to today's standards is just completely unreasonable. Of course, photos aren't going to look as nice as what my 14 Pro can do, especially in lower light situations, as the 10 doesn't even have a night mode to help us out. So that's where you really see the age with grainy, blurry images, though that doesn't mean that it can't capture the moment just fine. And outdoors or in good lighting, the iPhone X still does a pretty decent job. Heck, there are photos I took with my iPhone X back in the day when I was still using it that I still use as wallpapers here and there today. There's some that I took that look really, really good. You can get some gorgeous shots, and the nice thing about this era of phones is that while yes, what we have 6 years later has gotten much better with bigger sensors and software advancements, what we had in 2017 was still pretty good, and so it holds up great today, especially compared to the phones of like a decade ago. So basically, in the right conditions, you can take a really nice shot with the iPhone X, and having the versatility of the 1x and 2x zoom was something I very much appreciated back in the day. That being said, if you're going to be upgrading from the iPhone X anyways, I do think you will appreciate whatever newer camera you end up with. Overall though, I think the iPhone X holds up about as well as one could hope. Beautiful design, still fantastic display, decent hardware running it all, good enough camera, and what is still at the moment the latest version of iOS, at least until iOS 17 comes out in the fall of 2023. It's really the same things that hold any older phone back, holding back this one. Battery life, as well as the other potential damage or issues that can occur after using the phone for half a decade. While I wouldn't recommend buying the iPhone X anymore, and I do think now would be a solid time to upgrade to something better, I also think the iPhone X manages to hold its own in 2023. The iPhone X may have been the first $1,000 phone, but if you've been using it since it first launched, I think it's pretty fair to say you got your money's worth. This iPhone completely changed the entire smartphone landscape, and although we might be beginning to see a shift into the next generation of technology, the iPhone X is still more than fully capable of doing the job for the millions of users still daily driving it today. And so with that, I think I'm right about done here. Not my most in-depth review, but frankly, this is still just a decent phone. I'm sorry to see it losing iOS support. I feel like it could handle a little bit more, but as said, at least it will be fast forever. That's an accomplishment in and of itself. If you found this video interesting or helpful, maybe hit that like button and consider subscribing for more content just like this. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Josh from 91 Tech, and I will see you all next time.